The federal election, April 28th, coming up next week. Today on the podcast, we have Ryan Williams, the incumbent MP for the Bay of Quinte, and the Conservative candidate. I am Ryan Snyder, and this is the Take a Look podcast. Ryan, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you. Nice to have another Ryan.
Yeah, it's Ryan squared today.
That's right.
Well, maybe we can just jump in a bit into your background. Maybe people aren't so familiar with who you are, even though maybe they're not on the Facebook groups and they don't know, but or they haven't seen the signs around. But can you tell us just a bit about your background and how that brought you into the political sphere?
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me on today. It's nice to be part of a local homegrown podcast and part of great content here in the area. And podcasts, I think, are incredibly important. So thanks for what you do. I've been an MP now 3.5 years. It seems like a long time. It's been quite an honor to go into the House of Commons on behalf of the Bay of Quinte residents and speak on their behalf in House of Commons, the House of Common People, we call it. And my background is I'm a hotelier. Third generation. I was a week old when we opened our first hotel, and I've been in that family business for a long time. But I learned early from my father, from my grandfather, that service and community means we give back. That when you're in business, it's one aspect. The other aspect is you give back to your community. So for a long, long time, I've been involved in community organizations, whether that be the Chamber of Commerce or helping out with so many organizations. But I started with chairing Bay of Quinte Tourism for 10 years, which was I think it was 6 or 7 years. I was involved with the organization for a decade, which was a fascinating experience, bringing together at that time Prince Edward County and Belleville and Quinte West as one brand of Bay of Quinte, and from there creating a group with Adrian Bax called Bay of Quinte Living, which was at the time about 15 years ago. We had a hard time attracting people to the region, so we call it Bay of Quinte Living. Was developers, and it was home builders, and it was realtors, and it was immigration. And we created the region's first immigration portal. At the time, we couldn't get new immigrants to the area, and we had a 0.2% growth rate. It was really low. We found at the time we couldn't then hold jobs and keep our youth here. 80% of our youth leave this area. So we created a group called Quinnovation, which is about non-manufacturing entrepreneurship. So looking at entrepreneurs like yourselves, small businesses, and then different categories. Like we had a Quinte craft group. We had 18 ciders and craft breweries in the region, besides the 52 wineries, and a film industry. Really interesting. And from that, I ran as a Belleville City Councillor. My campaign was called Innovate Belleville, on really trying to bring the region and Belleville together and new innovation, and how do we get economic development growth going in the city. And from that, I went for the nomination for the Conservatives, and then I've been in this role. And in the Conservative Party as a shadow critic, I've been very fortunate to have roles in industry, shadow critic for industry, associate shadow critic for industry, on the Science and Innovation Committee, on ethics, on health, and then I got a competition role under Pierre Poliev. So really, I can talk more about that, about having our cell phone bills. How do we get more options for banking and open banking and grocery? And then my final role since August has been the critic for trade, at a time when trade was a very hot topic, and really working on what is trade for Canada and how do we grow it? So it's a big experience to me that you're going from a community organization role alongside having a business to now being a member of Parliament. Always mindful of the organizations and people that make up this region. I love this region. I love the Bay of Quinte. I've promoted it forever, and I'm happy to be I've been happy to be the member of Parliament for the Bay of Quinte region.
It's funny, actually, with speaking of Quinnovation, we were one of the businesses that were part of I guess it was like a pitch kind of Dragon's Den style thing. And actually, I think that's where I first met you there. So
that's right.
When we were first starting out 7 years ago, hard to believe it's been that long already.
Wow,
but yeah, it's been an exciting journey here in the Bay of Quinte. And we see the growth here, right? Like I think the Bay of Quinte is in competition with North Bay for the fastest rural growing communities in Ontario.
Yeah, the U-Haul statistics have us, I think, 4th or 5th in Canada. And so they track the U-Haul movements one way and where they're left. Yeah, this region's gorgeous. People, when the military members come here, they often retire here. We have, as you can tell, I was the past chair of tourism. We have 18 golf courses. The number one freshwater sandbar, largest sandbar in the world for freshwater, and that's Sandbanks, but North Beach and Presqu'île. We have 52 wineries. We have just incredible little inlets and hamlets and towns that you can go and I walked Wellington this morning with Mark Maroney. He was in town, and it's really neat to walk up and down, just talk to people, and they're having coffee, and it's just such a beautiful area. But also you can go downtown Belleville or Quinte West. You have the marina right on the water. We just have a stunning area, and it's becoming a greater attraction, not only for tourism, but for people to live here. The key to this area is getting us back on pace when it comes to tackling the crime, some of this homelessness that we're seeing, the food insecurity, keeping jobs here. Part of my role at Quinnovation was trying to identify what industries need help to attract more entrepreneurs and more workers here. Loyalist College is a big one where we have to support them, and it's a huge asset for this area, but it's getting programs shut down. So when we get into why this election is important for Canada, that's one aspect, but also for this region. It's tremendously important for what the future of this region will mean to so many, for the future, for those that live here.
Let me ask you about when you first got into politics. Like, obviously, as a town councillor, there's no parties involved. You're kind of independent in that way. Why'd you go the conservative route? What values or goals did you identify with that party?
So there's a quote that I've always loved about the Conservatives, that Conservatives believe as human beings we should be able to live free, be free, and pursue that which motivates us the most, whether that's to be a politician, a doctor, a volunteer, a policeman, a parent, not because man or government says is the right thing to do, but it's our God-given natural rights. And what that means is that Conservatives believe in equality of opportunity. Everyone in Canada should have the opportunity for education, the opportunity to work hard, to get a good job, the opportunity to pick what city you want to live in, the opportunity to love who you want to love, the opportunity to be a great Canadian, and whatever that means for you and your community and your family. That's the long and short of conservatism. We don't believe that government should intervene. And I'll give you a big example of that, which I talk about now in this election. There's two parts. Our government believes in no carbon taxes, and our government believes in less mandates. And the one where this government's come in, and these are specific topics for this election, this government believes in a carbon tax for industrial. It was consumer, but also that you should be able to or have to drive an electric vehicle because the government thinks that's the right thing to do. Not many Canadians know there's an electric vehicle mandate in place right now. It was without a debate in Parliament that says by 2035 you can no longer buy in Canada a hybrid or gas car. You have to buy an electric automobile. It was quietly put in place by the Environmental Minister, Guy Beau, in the last Parliament, and he just changed SEPA, the Environmental Protection Act. And all they did was said that all vehicles made in Canada have to have zero emissions. It's an example where government thinks they know best. And, the examples we give of why this doesn't work, not only with the cold climate we have here and rural Canadians who, need their vehicles, but Peterborough just had a powder outage 3 weeks ago. It was one of the only Sundays we didn't door knock, and power was out for 5 days. At that point, you don't have a car if you have an electric vehicle and you can't power it. It's an example where government thinks they know best, where our alternative is, if you as a family believe that you want an electric vehicle, then buy one. Make sure you get the adapter in your home. As a government, our job is to make sure the infrastructure is there, the power grid, if we need whatever that power supply is. But it's not to tell you to buy that vehicle. And that's the difference in a nutshell between Conservatives and Liberal governments. We really believe in the power of people, that you can go, as long as you have the opportunity. We want to make sure people have equal opportunity for education, equal opportunity to get a good job. There's lots of good jobs available, equal opportunity to healthcare, equal opportunity to be able to raise a family. Those are the things that are important to us, and that's why I'm a Conservative.
What is the Conservative approach to climate change? Because often in the media, the narrative is Poilievre doesn't have a plan. There is no plan. What is it? We're going to get rid of the carbon tax. We're just going to, build the pipelines. But what does this mean for the longevity of our environment?
Well, we always believe that we should have clean rivers, clean lakes, clean air. And sure, we have already incredible environmental laws that stop massive pollution. You can't burn tires in Canada. You can't dump garbage in the lakes. But at the same time, we have rules that we don't really understand, which is where Montreal, for instance, dumps sewage into the St. Lawrence.
Yeah, and which flows right down overpass.
And we have overflow days, even in this region. If there's too much water, there's an outtake. And then we believe in technology over taxes. We really believe in those environmental laws that protect the environment, but ensuring that, the big thing we found since 2015, there were massive demonstrations on climate because everything else was taken care of for Canadians. So you could afford your rent, your mortgage, you could afford groceries. They weren't too bad. You had some money left over for vacation. Canadians had it pretty good. So when you have, and rich nations will automatically take care of the environment in their own way because you have the money to do so. Poor nations don't. So that's why the most polluting nations in the world are China and India with the most amount of population, but they need cheap power to produce what they're doing, and so they burn coal. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing we can do for Canada, for the environment, is to make sure we produce an abundance of our abundant, clean natural gas, and that's our LNG, we call it liquid natural gas, and we sell that to the world. That displaces coal, so it's half the emissions of coal. And I always talk about when I grew up, we had these smog advisory warnings every morning in the news and the radio. Everyone listened to the radio. And why do we have that then? Well, back then, about 25, 30 years ago, Ontario was burning coal for power plants. And I'll give credit to the Liberal government at some point. I think it was probably McGuinty back then. They changed and phased out all of our coal power plants for natural gas. And now you wake up in the morning, we don't have those smog advisory warnings. You don't have them. And the difference was because we used our technology instead of taxes to lower our emissions. Our number one export to China is coal. So it's really, when you look at what's happening across the world, and the other thing too, I always talk about, well, it's almost like in the 70s when they had airplanes and they had a smoking and non-smoking section on the airplane, which seems ridiculous to me. And we're really in that non-smoking section of the airplane, and we're passing the cigarettes up to the smoking section. We're shipping coal to China, and they're opening 1 or 2 coal plants a month, and they're burning that coal. And the winds, by the way, go from west to east. If you look at NASA maps, and why we have heat domes over BC is they're burning more coal than ever before, and it's getting trapped in the west side of Canada. So our answer to when we're looking at emissions, and we have 1.8% of the emissions of Canada, is not to tax our own citizens and get that emission down to 1%. It's how do we drop 5% of the emissions across China and across India. And how we do that is produce our abundance. We have the second largest supply of liquid natural gas, to get terminals built with that and make it cheaper than coal and ship that to Southeast Asia. And that's how we displace. And if we did that, even just a small fraction of that would do way more than we could ever do taxing our own citizens. And that's why the carbon tax doesn't work. And we have to look at new solutions that actually help Canadians and help the rest of the world.
So I've been on board with the LNG plan for a long time, and I've actually advocated this with anybody I get into a conversation with, because it seems to make sense to me. It's like, yeah, around the world, let's burn cleaner fuel that brings our emissions down across the globe, especially to replace dirty coal or not ethically sourced fossil fuels as well. But with that, there comes a lot of, I think, struggles with that too, right? Because it's easy to say, let's get our natural gas to market. I mean, one of Trudeau's biggest foibles was turning down the German chancellor and the president of Japan as well, to say there's no business case in LNG, which is wild to me. But internally in Canada, we do have some barriers even to building our pipelines and getting those to market. One of those being Quebec, having a deal with them. We saw in the leadership debate that the Bloc leader was quite vocal about, Pierre potentially kind of bulldozing his way through to just make plans without Quebec's will. Not to mention we have a lot of reservations and Indigenous relations that are not settled at this point. So how do you see a plan moving forward? Say everything's greenlit, we have a Conservative majority, the policies made through to get our LNG to market. How do we approach those challenges?
So this is probably one of the biggest forks in terms of decisions on this election, which will have major outcomes for Canada. And that's the fact that we're the only party that have said we would develop our pipelines and our natural resources and get them to market in a pretty quick timeline. We've announced shovel-ready zones that we would get ready within a year. We would repeal C-69, which is dubbed the No New Pipelines Act. Mark Carney said he's keeping C-69, and he has said in French he's not doing pipelines. So this is one of the biggest decisions. In my role for trade, we always identify what is trade and why is it important to Canada. Well, trade is when you produce and sell the things you do best, and you trade for the rest. So we have the second largest supply of natural gas, the third most supply of oil in the world. We have potash, aluminum, uranium. We have food packaging here in this region, processing. We have so many things that the world wants. We have the most natural resources per capita of any nation in the world. We should be a rich rich nation from that. Then you have a government that's under Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney that have stifled all of that innovation, put bills that actually stop and deregulate or regulate all of our natural resources into the ground. And what the result of that, there was a study that was done by Energy Now, but my department did it as well in Ottawa. So the amount of suspended or canceled energy projects was $660 billion since 2015. So you mentioned Germany not asking for certain things that weren't developed. There was about, of that 29 projects, half were LNG, half were oil, East Link, the pipeline, LNG Canada, things that didn't happen. And part of that, what Canadians have to understand when we did these numbers was that was also between 100 and 200,000 jobs, many of them six figures. But more importantly for Canadians, it meant that we kept $40 billion that would have went annually from taxes into the treasury out. Now, my question is always, what can you do with $40 billion? And that's what trade means for Canadians. Trade is wealth when we do that. We don't grow bananas here or coffee or make computer chips. We have natural resources. So stopping those developments have actually hurt Canada in a big way. One, for deficits that have caused inflation, and everyone who goes to the grocery store knows what that means for them. But two, for the fact that we don't have that prosperity, we don't have that income going forward that pays for healthcare and dental. And that's the decision that I think is the most potent for this election coming up. You have a fork in the road for a government that's going to do that and a government that won't. When you asked about, well, what does that mean for Quebec? Well, fortunately for us, in Parliament, if we had a majority, you're working with all parties, and Mr. Blanchette represents the Bloc Québécois, which is only a small portion. It's actually with Legault that we're going to be dealing with in the provinces. There was a poll done in Quebec and the rest of Canada about the acceptance of pipelines right now. And actually in Quebec, it was 74% of respondents saying they would accept pipelines. So Legault, the premier of Quebec, will be the one we deal with all interprovincial trade barriers. And so that's another topic where, what Trump has given us in Canada is actually, besides patriotism, where every Canadian now is standing together saying we'll never be the 51st state. The second part of it is the premiers, for the most part, who've stood together to say we're going to reduce the interprovincial trade barriers that exist through Canada, where the figure is stopping $80 billion worth of trade. But part of that will be then working with those provinces about how do we get energy projects through. And the last thing you mentioned was on Indigenous First Nations. Part of Pierre Poilievre's plan is to cost share with those nations 10%, which then he actually has First Nations standing with him now saying, we want this to go through. So all of that is really important. And only with a Pierre Poilievre and a conservative government will you actually see those kind of initiatives go forward, where under Mark Carney, he's made it very clear he's going to keep C-69. He's going to stop pipelines from going through across Canada. Most importantly, what it means for Canadians, well, the deficits, the grocery bills, your cost of living going up because we're not selling what we have. But I think the second part of it will be you're actually you lose jobs, you lose prosperity. You're going to have a Canada that's poorer and weaker, and that's the end result more than anything else.
Well, when Justin Trudeau said there's no business case for this, why do you think that is? Why was this all turned down? Is this just purely, is it genuine where he believes that this is the best way forward for the environment? What's going on behind that decision? Because obviously when we look at the numbers, even from the emissions side, if we have people replacing coal with natural gas, the emissions come down across the world. No, so when you look at the numbers there, it seems to make sense. So why do you think, what's the motivation to that the Liberal, Justin Trudeau and his leadership, why did they move away from that?
So it was ideology over reality, which is what it was. Same as that government stood in the House of Commons over and over and said that people were better off with the carbon tax than without it. And what we saw from Canadians, when the carbon taxes were removed because of our push, we were the ones, I think since Pierre's been as a leader, the first thing he said was axe the tax. It was been consistent along the whole way. The Liberal government, every one of their MPs, every one of their ministers and the Prime Minister stood up every day and said how great it was. There was a crack last year when they took home heating off of, or the carbon tax off of home heating in Atlantic Canada. And that was when it was, okay, now you're admitting that these people are paying more. When finally Mark Carney took it off based on it was our push to take it off, then it was incredible to me to have or ex-ministers or Liberal members doing videos where they're filling their car up, telling Canadians how much they're saving. And we all see it. I mean, gas this week it's crazy wild right now, by the way. It was 110 I saw the other day, 118 somewhere else, 124. You know, what we always push in my part is competition, not taxes, to get, price of everything down. But Canadians see it. They're not fooled by that. And the carbon tax was more ideology as well. We were pushing a carbon tax that only a couple other nations in the world had done. We were the experiment. And what Canadians saw, because it was the grocery store prices that were up high, 38% higher than Americans who didn't have a carbon tax, and then our push here regionally was for farmers who, especially in Ontario, when we grow crops, the fields are wet. So they have to dry the grain. So the grain farmers here, they have to use natural gas and propane, which neither were exempt from the carbon tax. So they were passing that cost from the carbon tax, which was just as much at this point, because they raised the carbon tax 5 times. They had a without a debate in Parliament, they automatically increased taxes, same as escalator taxes for our spirit and wine producers. The point for Canadians is they were taxed out. Farmers were taxed out, the truckers who trucked the food, grocery stores were even paying it, Canadians were paying it themselves. We were the experiment, and we saw the results of that experiment, which is the carbon tax was a failure. It didn't work. And there's no guarantee in this government, again, one of those forks in the road. You have a Conservative government who's saying axe the tax forever for everyone, versus a Mark Carney government saying, well, we're going to put it on the industry now. And Mark Carney said, well, how much steel do you use? And no, our point is you cannot tax a country, by the way, where the emissions didn't go down at all after this carbon tax. It went up 5 times. The emissions didn't go down. And Mark Carney's on the record saying it's still too low. Well, how much was too high? It was a failed experiment. When Justin Trudeau said there's no business case, he was wrong. The Americans signed deals with Japan through Alaska, which were worth, I think, $50 billion for LNG that we could have had. It could have been our jobs, our natural gas. We have to turn it around. We have to be the ones winning. We have to be the nation supplying natural gas to displace coal. We've got it.
I mean, carbon tax obviously, I think, has affected affordability, and the narrative, like you say, has been, no, it's all good, it's all good. I mean, we run a business where we pay for all of our fuel for our guys who go on shoots, and we're not exempt from those prices either, and that affects our bottom line. But affordability is the biggest thing right now. I remember even before COVID, it was, I think the stats was like 50% of Canadians were within $200 of insolvency every month, and then COVID hit, and inflation, and it just kept going and going, and now we're at this place where affordability is just a laughable term because it doesn't really mean anything anymore. How did we get here to a place of unaffordability for just regular everyday citizens, and how do we get out of this? How do we actually make things more affordable? How do we get there?
So inflation, Pierre was the best at this. This is why I love Pierre Poilievre. He was always able to articulate the problems Canadian had, and he was against the Bank of Canada. He was against Mark Carney. He was against Justin Trudeau. And he always talked about inflation as more money chasing less goods. That was as simple as he made it. If you print more money in Canada, if you just have the bank create all this money and you put it into the market and you have less goods, well, the price of everything goes up. It's kind of that whole discussion over if you create scarcity, and you have an abundance of money, then everything becomes more expensive. He did talks on this in the House of Commons. We talked about copper nose, which was this. I mean, it's not a new problem. The same problems have been around for 3,000 years. They've been repeated. And copper nose was a ruler who they cut the edges off coins. And when people walk around with these edges cut, they rub your nose and you have copper in your nose. And that was because they were making new coins with the old money. It doesn't matter what if it was coins or paper dollars, or if it's currency in Canada that's digital or whatever. If you create more of something and you have less products, you create inflation. That's just what it is. And we saw it in spades. And Canadians, I think they saw it everywhere, but mostly at the grocery store. Where in 2020, a basket of goods that was $100 now costs about $127. Or 134. I think it's around that number.
Yeah, I can't go to the grocery store without spending $80 for just a
And
little
what's
bag
the result here in this region? And this is why affordability is the number one issue of this election, bar none. It's the fact that 1/3 of our region, 1/3, one of every 3 houses, are food insecure. And food insecurity means that they're making choices to not buy meat, not buy vegetables. And it's terrible. In a country as big as we have it, where we plant 45 million acres of protein fiber, we have food processing in a region. We're a G7 nation, and people are making food choices because they can't afford it. That to me is literally the most basic problem that encapsulates what this election's about, but also the failures of this Liberal government. Because the other side of it was the bank governors, including Mark Carney, because he was after he left, because he went to the UK just before 2020, before COVID. But he was also saying in the press that we see deflation. We don't see inflation coming. And Tiff Macklin was the governor, the bank governor at that time, saying the same thing. The only one saying the opposite was Pierre Poilievre, saying that if you print more money, this is just how history works. We're going to have massive inflation. And he's on the record in 2021 and 2022 in front of the press saying we're going to have massive, this is when we're seeing 6 to 8% jumps of inflation. And he was saying, you keep printing this money, it's going to continue to happen. And it did. So the premise now, even with the platforms that have been released, Pierre Poilievre, why he's so good and why he's such a different choice is he actually brought a budget or a platform for the election where our deficits are half what Mark Carney's are. And he was a bank governor. He's supposed to have the better resume. But we actually have platforms where Pierre Poilievre gets that inflation has caused what we spend too much. And what he's done to do that is to cut the waste. He's cutting $10 billion a year from consultants. I mean, we hired 140,000 employees in Ottawa, and we're still spending $20 billion a year in consultants. Why? So he's cutting half of that out. We're looking at waste for money that we've spent, not all of it, but some of the money we're sending overseas. Some we have to do, but some we don't. And it's ideas again at home where people can't afford to move out of their parents' basements. We have people right now when I'm door knocking that are spending 100% of their income on rent. That used to be something unheard of, but it was also disallowed. It was always a maximum of 30% of your income could be spent on rent. But we're in such an affordability crisis. Housing, food, cost of living as a whole, even as I've talked about more pocketbook issues in the House of Commons, which are your cell phones, even if you want to fly in this country, or, if we look at grocery store and banking, all those things to me we're paying double that any other nation does. And why? And what for? It's because it's an affordability issue. So as much as Trump has been an issue, I think what I frame this election as is every party will stand up to Trump. No one wants to be the 51st state, but only one party is standing up for affordability, and that's the Conservative Party.
Well, speaking of Trump, we're still in this who knows what's going to happen with this tariff war. Lots of changes almost daily coming out of Washington. What is the practical approach to dealing with Trump? And is Pierre equipped to actually fix this problem? Is it fixable? Or is the solution we just go elsewhere?
Well, solution is, and it's, again, why Pierre's the best to sit down with him, is the solution is to make Canada relentlessly competitive, to make sure that we utilize our strengths. Every country would trade places with Canada in a heartbeat because of the natural resources, the talent, the institutions, the people that we have here. We've got all the ingredients to make ourselves self-sufficient, more sovereign. And what's happened over 10 years is we became weak. We, first of all, didn't have a prime minister who stood up for Canada, flew down in a whim to Mar-a-Lago and almost bent the knee when that was the last thing you should be doing to a new president with a mandate to utilize America's strength in their own way. We had to the answer is to utilize Canada's strength or to make us stronger, better, faster. And the only one who will do that is Pierre Poilievre. Again, going back to developing our natural resources and making sure we can sell to the world and not just the Americans, holding our intellectual property in Canada and stop giving it away. Of 100 patents in Canada, only 15 are Canadian, of which half are from international companies. We give all of our ideas away. The one example I always talk about is Tesla does research in Dalhousie University in Halifax. What's in Dalhousie? And 100% of that IP goes to Dartmouth, which is then owned by the Americans. We had Huawei, which was a Chinese company. It was public, doing research in our Canadian, about 8 to 10 of our U15 institutions in Canada, and all that research is going to China. Taxpayer-funded research dollars. We have to get back to owning what we create, creating all the resources that we have in Canada. And when we have a position of strength, we work with Americans on a new rejigged CUSMA agreement, part of that, also that weakness we had, is we weren't at the table for the security. When we talk about NATO, we were 1.33%. There's the push that we get to 3%. Well, we do that by developing our natural resources and getting more money, but also we do it by strengthening Canada. And there's 5 areas when I was the trade critic that we work on. One was infrastructure, protecting our pipelines, our waterways, our ports, looking at our development of infrastructure for the security side, which is we're not going to go to the eastern flank of Latvia or South China Sea, but we are going to develop our Arctic and our northern portion. We've announced 2 bases we would do in the north, which is really important. Third is our critical minerals. One of the biggest investors for critical minerals in Canada is the Department of Defense for the U.S. Why not? Why isn't it Canada, right? But we've already have something happening, and we need to protect that. When we look at our even data centers and protecting our IP and ensuring that that's something that we look at as a whole, as a dual nation. And it's our energy. The last one's our energy. How do we utilize our energy? Because the bigger threat is not the Americans, because something hasn't come up in this election. It's actually China. And why Trump has been doing some of his geopolitical maneuvering, it's China and Russia and the BRICS. And before this election, they were very vocal on de-dollarizing the American dollar. They were very vocal on becoming a greater force and power. And so we've lost that in this election. We've just focused on Trump, but the bigger threat is actually China and those groups. And we've been either with it's become China interference, which has happened already in this election a few times, or the fact that we've been too dependent on China for trade. The example was when I was part of the opposition when we wanted to put the tariffs on electric cars out of China, because they have what's called mercantilism, where they heavily subsidize 100% of their industry, which is not fair practice. We don't do that here, but it threatened 500,000 jobs in Canada. But when they retaliated against Canada, they put 100% of a tariff on canola farmers. And somehow we left ourselves exposed without a free trade agreement that all of our canola, or 90% of it, was going to China instead of finding other partners in Southeast Asia like Indonesia and Japan and South Korea. These are the bigger issues that I see coming up, that the geopolitical issues. Once we form government, I see us sitting down with the Americans pretty quickly, hammering out a good deal, because as soon as we strengthen Canada, that's good for the Americans too. I can go into detail of the biggest problem I had from Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney now is not once have either one of them stood up to say, when Trump says that America's getting a bad deal from Canada, to say, wait on a minute, you're getting an unbelievable deal from Canada, because 90% of our crude oil, or 97% from Alberta, goes to Texas. Those are American jobs. Most of our aluminum smelted in northern Quebec, and it's smelted there because we have cheap hydroelectricity, goes to the U.S., it gets rolled in the U.S., we buy it at 60% markup. Our IP, again, from Tesla, that's an American Tesla that goes to Dalhousie and then goes to Dartmouth. You're getting an unbelievable deal from Canada. What we will do instead, of course, we're going to develop our resources which get American jobs, but we're going to then be steadfast on creating American or Canadian jobs, Canadian paychecks. That's what Pierre Poilievre is going to do by strengthening Canada, and that's the most important part of this election.
Well, I think that's the kind of the weird mind F that for most of us Canadians is like, Trump is throwing us in with Mexico and China, where there has been a very different economic and trade situations with those two countries. China obviously being very much taking advantage of the U.S. economy, especially when it comes to IP. But we're getting looped into the same kind of thing. And his rhetoric is that, we will be the 51st state. Why do you think he's picking on us? Like, what is his agenda here? Is he being hyperbolic, or is he being serious and saying, no, we're going to...
No, this is who Trump is. Trump's a bully. If you read his books, the one I read was Robert Lighthizer wrote a book. He was the last U.S. trade representative, called No Trade is Free. And another one is by Jack O'Donnell, who used to work for Trump when he had Atlantic City casino properties. And you read both and you get a sense of Trump. Trump's very much in his life as a businessman has been a bully and got away by threatening the most, using lawyers and force, and he got something back from it. He learned his art of the deal is all about making a deal based on he's doing exactly what Trump will do. And Trump, people shouldn't be surprised on Trump. You can read about him. This is who he is. He took advantage of a very weak prime minister who left a country in a very weakened state, and he was able to get away with it because he was just elected with a massive mandate from the U.S. The answer to that is to combat that with strength, to make, to stand up for Canada, make it stronger, and make the deals. the problem with that is we are in a weakened state. So you have to really focus on how do we make Canada stronger first, while also sitting down with the Americans to really tackle it's the China effect. And when you pay attention to what actually happened, Trump threatened tariffs for both Mexico and Canada, but really put them on China. China got the worst end of the deal for anyone, and then other countries. And the result of that has been that Canada last month lost 66,000 jobs, while the Americans gained 320,000 jobs. So he's getting what he wants. Investments dried up. We have Canada becoming less attractive. This is why with Pierre Poilievre in our government, it's less taxes. It's looking at capital gains where deferrals, and one of the best policies Pierre has is any capital gain that's invested in Canadian businesses will be fully deferred from capital gains, which is incredible policy, looking at how do we make Canada more attractive. None of our pension plans invest in Canada because they're not attractive. They invest in the Americans and in Turkey and Brazil because there's less regulations and they can get their money back. We have to make Canada more attractive. And that's why the fork in the road again is you go 4 more years down with this government that overregulates and stops investment, or a whole change with deregulation, less taxes, more attractive for investment, and making Canada stronger. That's the only way we stand up to the Americans. But like I said, we have that advantage of having such a great resource-based economy that if we did develop it, Canada is going to be in good shape.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's jump over to housing for a minute, because I think this is probably one of the biggest things next to affordability, not just as far as people need a place to live, they need to have shelter and food, but the growth of our economy is based on the middle class, and the middle class is based on home ownership. This has been true historically, mainly because when you own property, you can then leverage loans to maybe start a business or to have additional units to rent out and grow. I myself got into real estate at a pretty good time where I was able to, buy, leverage, and sell into the place where I am now. How do we get to a place where housing is, I don't even like the word affordable anymore because it's been so bastardized, but attainable? How do we get to a place where people can not just rent, but actually buy and own so they can enrich and grow and invest in themselves?
Well, it's again back to what's the reverse of inflation. Instead of more money chasing less goods, it's more goods, more supply. Mm-hmm. And housing, it's not a demand issue, it's a supply issue. So it's a complex issue. But really, when you come down to it, when I've been on planning committee for City of Belleville, when my first question in the House of Commons to the Prime Minister on the first day of Parliament as an MP was housing, it's been an issue that's been there. I see the solutions to it, and for whatever reason, governments are still in the way. So the solution is government has to get out of the way of housing. That's the answer. It's not got more government. Mark Carney's plan to build 500,000 homes of the government agency is the worst thing you could ever imagine. Government getting in the way is why we're in the housing crisis to begin with. And it becomes, it's a provincial issue in terms of how we're doing official plans and planning act and the official policy statement, because everything's about getting in the way. Even Belleville planning, so the BILT, which is the Toronto Home Builders Association, did actual study on how long it takes to build a mid-rise or a high-rise in Toronto. It's 10 years. Wow. 10 years for housing, because of all the plans, all the way we do the planning process, the public debate portion of the public input portions, the way we do the official plans, the zoning, how we do all of it is stopped housing. So there's really 2 parts to fix this. One is to incentivize municipalities in the provinces to lessen the rules. It's to communicate into, my point, it's not been brought up a lot, but it has to be mandated that the municipalities have to talk to the public about where housing is going to go. The biggest NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, is always on people being surprised at where housing is coming from and where it's going. But if the cities are mandated to tell people where the zoning is going to be so they're not surprised, I think it lessens the opposition to housing going in. And third, it's making it easier for home builders, not for the government, to plan, develop, and build homes quickly as possible. And there's a lot of impediments to why they can't get that happening. But what I'm starting with as the MP, and I even did this when I did deputations to council in the last 3 years, we have to set targets. I know the province has done some of those as well, but we need in 10 years 5,500 homes in this city, in this region. And of that, 1,500 have to be affordable market rent. So you look at how that's going to be happening, who's going to build it, and who's going to be there. When we start with affordable market rent, which to me is the affordability issue. And we need affordable market rent means between $800 and $1,000 a month. no more, because it's impossible to live. The people getting ODSP are only making $1,700. That's still over the 30% threshold for income, which it should be under. But that's to look at, and the best example we've had here, which models the whole country, was Bob Cottrell and Phil Spry with a group called Altogether Housing. So they took a developer who took the risk, which is Phil Spry, with the non-for-profit who went after the funding, which is Altogether Housing and Bob Cottrell, and they came together and they built St. James Place on Station Street. And they're also involved with Andy Spry and another group in Bloomfield. And one example was one that worked, and they got half of those apartments for market rent and half of them for what they call, affordable rent, which is $800, around there, $900 a month, and the other half at $1,400, which is still affordable. It's better than $2,400 we're seeing across the region. Pinecrest was an old school. This should be the example of where housing, it's perfect. Mm-hmm. We're using...
We've had Ken Howell on the podcast. Yes. He's great.
But they've been so long, they changed the name of the development. It was Love Song under Ken Howe, and now it's called Pinecrest, and they're still waiting on government grants and assistance.
Well, I don't know if you saw the article CBC posted. Basically, it's a CHMC issue where they haven't updated their what the value of rents are. So when they're proposing, this is what we're going to have for affordable units, well, they're saying actually the affordable rent is here, but they actually need this.
It's unacceptable.
So the equation doesn't.
No, but it's unacceptable. The project's been in the queue for 8 years. CMHC's been involved. They spent $200,000 on consultants just to fill the government reports out. Like that's in the end. When we look at, there was 8,000 volunteer hours from residents in the county who want to see this built, and more importantly, $1 million donated privately to this initiative. You know, if you looked at it and there were no rules and the community put $1 million together, that would have been done 4 or 5 years ago. But government gets in the way and they stop the progress. And that's what's the most frustrating part of this housing is that, and what Pierre understands, it's people that get in the way. It's the government that gets in the way of these developments. And so what we're proposing over the Mark Carney plan is that we get government out of the way. We incentivize the municipalities to drop red tape, and the provinces is to me the
How do you
biggest
incentivize
ones.
them?
Well, you base the growth numbers on, and what we've said is if municipalities have so many permits approved earlier, they're going to get bonuses for that. And here, I'll talk on behalf of the municipalities where they find the trouble with that is they can't hire the staff in the planning departments because of our lack of skilled trades in Canada. And I know Quinte West has been one municipality that had someone hired and then another municipality poached that staff member. It's a lack of skilled trades, but a lot of also part of that is the official plans and the Planning Act for Ontario are so intrusive and so difficult to get through. You have to have all those staff to get through the processes. The other thing I always talk about in this region is we're not looking at densification. We look at sprawl. So all of our housing developments are going outside the city boundaries, and there's still those 800,000 plus residences. The difference is, I remember I was knocking yesterday east of Hague Road, and there seems to be, I think those housing units within 400,000 or 500,000, which are better. So how do we get more of those? Well, you have to have those pre-zoning approvals, and then what you're looking at is to make sure that there's no impediments for the builders to go and get those approvals. Now, what the builders are telling me, this is why this housing issue is so complex. If they have housing developments they planned 6-7 years ago, that's how long it takes to do a subdivision, and those houses aren't selling because of interest rates. Well, the problem they have is going to the bank to get more money to build more units. And so it's really a tricky conundrum. So our answer is to make sure when we go to these municipalities, we'll make sure we look at all the impediments that are in place for the housing, and that we will look at ways to ensure that you're getting the talent you need, either that's skilled labor for the workers or the planning staff for the municipalities. But and especially for the big city centers, we want you to be approving permits, not locking them up in delay and red tape. And that's the only way, if we get them approved, builders will build if they're allowed to build.
Right.
We have to lessen all of those. But for the most part, the biggest impediment, like I said, 10 years to build a low-rise or high-rise in Toronto is stopping almost anything from being done in the next 2 years, which we need to get housing done.
Another big problem that we do have with housing development, for example, I mean, even with the dollar for doors incentive, whether you're going to give release more funds to municipalities for building more units, or I don't know if they're planning on restricting for not building. For example, in Prince Edward County, we're now in a 2-year development freeze. So there's no new developments happening. There's stuff backlogged, but basically we're being held up because of infrastructure, which is on the provincial side. So how then does the federal government properly work, not just with the municipalities or incentivize them? How do you work with the province to actually make sure that infrastructure is there so that part of the equation is also being filled?
Well, infrastructure for housing, I know will be a big initiative. If we're looking at, Pierre's talked before that where we have transit in certain big city centers, it'll automatically need to be high density around those transit stations, and that municipalities can't be blocking those developments. Here, I think, to me, it's Pinecrest as the example. It needs to be approved right away. We need to get funding going and get that done, and then we need to find ways to replicate that. The second part is to look and talk to the municipalities, and if we're in government and I'm the member of parliament, to find the roadblocks with developing and talking to home builders. It's the home builders themselves who need to build the homes. And like I said, it's not a demand issue, it's a supply issue. I'll tell you about one thing I liked about, there's a lot about the Housing Accelerator Fund I didn't like, which was the bureaucracy. We weren't guaranteeing houses being built. It was really just going to the bureaucracy, more bureaucracy for the city. It didn't guarantee any homes for that amount of money. But one thing they did have was what was called housing of a right. And housing of a right meant that in certain areas where you could have a fourplex, you didn't have to go back to permitting or planning to get that done. It was already of a right. That's one way to densify different areas. And as an investor, if you know you can buy a property and turn that into 4 units instead of 1,
right,
that makes it more likely that you can make that affordable.
But the province has turned that down multiple times now, correct? Like,
but it's in as
right?
of,
is that coming through now?
It came through with the Belleville, and that's not very common. When Belleville got their Housing Accelerator Fund, they had, the first time they had it, it wasn't approved, was because they denied the housing of a right provision. Wasn't as much as my opponent said it was me. I was fighting for that all along because I fought for all funding, but I found out afterwards they had denied that provision, which is why they got denied, one of the reasons. And then when it came to the second time, it was included. So that it is now in there. I know that the City of Toronto, I think, passed it for every property in Toronto, but I live in an area called Westboro in Ottawa when I've been a member of Parliament. And what they're doing, they've transit the light rail, which has been a boondoggle government $6 billion mess to get transit. But the transit, when it's done, all of those areas are now turning into where it was single bungalows are becoming semi-detached or quads. That's the answer to is we have to see density. The third thing is it's controversial, but it's there as well, is we have to control immigration in Canada. So that's something that we're also going to control. We brought 1.4 million people into Canada last year and built 220,000 homes, of which was 20,000 less than the year before. In Quinte last year, not many people know we built 100 less homes last year than they did the year prior, based on interest rates, but also based on not having the right homes built for the right people. Again, not a demand issue, but a supply issue. Those are the things too that we have to declare housing a crisis, which we haven't done in Parliament, no matter the government. Realize what the complexities are. And what I love about Pierre is he gets the housing issue. He is going to be really good at setting goals. And I'll tell you, when you have a conservative government too, you have a low bar. We had a minister in our government who expensed a $16 glass of orange juice. Her name was Bev Oda, and she got fired. We've had ministers.
She's my MP from my hometown, actually. She lived down the road from us.
So we've had ministers since that, given money to their friends, involved in $400 million slush fund scandals, ethics violations, and they still were there. Pierre doing this housing will be one of the key pillars that he has to get done, which is why electing him will ensure housing gets fixed. Mm-hmm. But the affordable issues as a whole, less scandals, getting rid of waste, being absolutely getting rid of the corruption, being high integrity, high functioning government is going to be something you get if you vote Conservative.
I want to talk a bit about the culture around politics, because we were talking a little bit before off camera, just how polarized Canada has become. I mean, we're kind of used to seeing this down in the States, but now in Canada, we see very much this polarized view of things, very narrative driven, whether it's far to the left, far to the right. What would you say to people who are just disinterested in politics at this point. Because I know for me, I just have to turn it off because it's not good for my mental health. It gets me frustrated. I feel like banging my head against the wall often, because when I want to talk about a nuanced issue, which housing is, and like you say, there's some controversial elements to that, such as immigration. How do we bring the tone down so we can actually get people more involved in this election?
It's pretty simple. Stop being divisive. The Liberal government that goes out and says we're all in this together and elbows up is the same one who said that a candidate for the prime ministership who is a Canadian citizen, married an immigrant from Venezuela, speaks both languages fluently, was adopted, has a gay father, was Donald Trump, the most hated individual in Canada right now. It was extremely divisive, and it should have been called out by the media right away when it happened. This person, they grasp at straws to try to merge the two together, but they're not. Pierre Poilievre is about Canada, deeply loves Canada, its nation, stands up for its workers, its people. We talk about Canada first, which is a Wilfrid Laurier quote that talks about Canada first, Canada last, Canada always. He's been talking about the issues, and that's when I said politics needs to be about the issues. Talk about your policy. Talk about how you defend the carbon tax. Talk about how you think everyone should be driving electric vehicle and going forward with the same government plan as the last 4 years versus our plan, which is to get more doctors to make sure that you have choice of a vehicle, that we're going to axe the carbon tax and we're going to get Canadian resources to market. That's what this election should have been about. And instead, I think if this election and we're successful in the election, I know that the topic we're going to be talking about on April 29th was what happened with the polls. Well, it's the same thing that happened with the U.S. of the last decade, and how you have that polarization. You have one side saying one side is Hitler or something heinous, another side talking about how it's policy or what we're going to do. And you have to get away from that divisiveness. In Canada, we need to talk about the issues on housing, affordability, about our healthcare system. Those are the things that we've brought to this election. We only also had so much time. We were shut out of Parliament. I haven't been in House of Commons since December 15th. And we didn't get time to prosecute a new prime minister. So we had, the first time of history, a prime minister who was never elected, never as a mayor, as an MLA, as an MPP, and he was in prime minister. And we had no time as opposition. We took our role very seriously. There's a difference between division and a difference between opposition holding the government to account. Our job in the House of Commons as the opposition was to hold the government to account. That's a fully functioning Westminster-style system of democracy. Winston Churchill always used to say that democracy is the worst form of government except for all others that have been tried. And the result of that, when you have a government or an election that's been allowed to divide Canadians, what I see at the door, if there's someone who's at the door and they say to me, Pierre is Trump and you'll never convince me otherwise, I can't change their mind. It's almost like a mind virus. And there's no real rationale besides some of the times when Pierre's talked about an issue or the carbon tax or standing up for Canadians. I'll admit, when I've never been a fan of carbon tax Carney, or, I think sometimes these slogans work and that's why we use them. But at the same time, there's nothing else that's similar at all. And what that means for Canada is that I feel that, first of all, we're going to have a high turnout for this election because of maybe some of this division, but because of also the thought that Canadians aren't going to be telling people how they're voting. They're just going to go vote. And I call it almost the Tesla effect. So many voters that I know, and this is sad about Canada, are saying, I'm voting for you, but shh, don't put a sign on my yard. It's so divisive, and that's exactly what's happened with the U.S. politics. Last thing I'll say, what's happened, and I'm really disappointed about it because I think it's a good system, is the collapse of the NDP, of the third party in Canada. Why our parliamentary system works so well is we had a third party. The third party right now is the Bloc Québécois, whose main focus is to separate Canada. And that's sad. It was always the NDP who stood up for workers, who stood up for the plight of Canadians. Now it's the Conservative Party standing up for workers, getting union endorsements, standing up for everyone, right? We have members from all walks of life, from every single background and diversity in our party, and we're standing up for that. And I think that's great, and that's great for Conservatives. But we lost another party that used to be someone that stood up for certain issues. And that's the other, I think, failure of our democratic system, was the fact that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP lost their sense of self when they merged with the Liberal Party. and they allowed themselves to be morphed with them instead of standing up. Probably what they should have done is called an election when they had the chance last November, probably when they would have done better. And I think for maybe for good or bad, this election, that party will have to reorganize and come back again.
Mm-hmm. We've kind of alluded to this before, but like this seems to be like the most consequential election of our generation. In your mind, why is this? Why is it that? Why are we here? How is this the most consequential election? Why is it so important that people come out and vote and get involved?
I think because it is affordability, and I think this is people's lives. When I go to the door, and it's the every person who say, like you mentioned before, that before COVID, people were $200 away from insolvency. Now they are at the door. They, when you have someone spending 100% of their income on rent, we are at the door. When people are making choices, 1 out of 3 households are making choice between what they're buying at the grocery store and they're not being able to send their kids to do sports or do other. We're at the door. And it's not just affordability, because there's so many other issues we haven't even talked about today. One is crime. Crime is tremendously up. I do a ride along with the Belleville police every year, and they're talking about how demoralized the police officers are because they're trying to do their job, but criminals are out on bail the next day. And our fix to crime is to put the repeat violent offenders and or anyone who's dealing drugs or manufacturing drugs away in jail so that they're away. The second part of it is, and when we've seen the drug use and no one's seen it worse than in BC, where they tried these failed experiments too of safe supply and vending machines where they handed out cocaine and crack. We've seen the results of that. It was never good for Canada and Canadians. It prolonged the inevitable, which was more drug use and more disparity in terms of our bigger city centers seeing more poverty and more people addicted to drugs. Our answer to that is really flipping the system for the justice system, that we put the bad guys away and we have deterrence for crime to fix that and give the tools, more importantly, to the police so they can do their jobs. But 2 is to give treatment and addiction services to those addicted to drugs, to help them get off the street, help them on their own, take care of their family and their lives, and get off the drugs. And we know it's not an easy route, but we've committed $250 million to the opioid treatment centers, of which Belleville with the hub will get some of that money for 5 years to start, which is going to help those people who are severely addicted get the treatment they need. Right now, if you want treatment in Belleville, you have to go to Kingston or Oshawa, and sometimes it's a 2 to 6 month wait. This is one issue I was out front of in Parliament right away. I was with the police chief Callahan at the time and the mayor Neil Ellis, talking about the need for a detox center right away. This is before we had the major issue we had in 2024 with the emergency called because of the overdoses, 90 overdoses in 36 hours. I was front and center on that. So we're the only party, again, when you talk about what this election is going to come down to, it's not just affordability, to your point, which is so dire, but it's also then the crime and drug issue that comes alongside that. And then it's all the other things. I mean, why this is going to be the most, I think, attended election in Canadian history is it affects so many people in so many levels. And as much as one side has tried to make this only about Trump, this election isn't about Trump. This election is about giving back control to people's lives and restoring the promise for Canada. The promise of Canada, which was that every generation, if they worked hard, left the country better for the next generation. And that promise has been broken for many years, where you could go get a good job, you could have enough income to pay for housing, have enough left over to get your groceries, get food, send your kids to sports, make sure that you had safe streets and you had a nice home in a safe neighborhood with a strong border under our strong flag. That's what we're restoring in this election. That's what Pierre Poilievre is restoring, is to give that dream back to Canadians. I can tell you right now, if you pick that or Trump, 9 people are picking that as their number one issue, and Trump is the last person. And that's what we're bringing into this equation.
So say you get elected next Monday. Monday is the election? Yes, next Monday,
Who's
the 28th.
counting? 5 days
Yes,
from now.
close. Our big, long elections we have here in
Yes,
Canada.
yes.
We've had 3 in this area in the past year. It's been wild.
And you have a municipal one next year, too.
I'm kind of exhausted by it, actually.
Yeah. Well,
it's too much.
Never get exhausted. Democracy could be the alternative. You don't want that. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
So say you get in for the next 4 years. What is your vision for the Bay of Quinte? What do you see in this area? How do you see it changing? How do you see it growing? What is your vision for it?
Well, I think it's really getting back to basics here. One thing I haven't talked about yet, which is one of my favorite policies that we have, is the Blue Seal program for doctors. So when we look at healthcare, we're short 55 doctors in this region. And where do you see it the most? Well, if you get hurt and you don't have a family doctor and you go to emergency, you can wait up to 13 hours in Bevel General Hospital right now, 4 or 5 hours in Trenton or Picton.
Yeah, it's wild.
And
Picton has the best wait times in the province.
Yes,
so
and it's not
crazy.
because of lack of care, it's lack of staff. And so our program was, and we're the only one pitching this for doctors, is Pierre identified that we had 20,000 internationally trained doctors, 20,000 in Canada.
Is it that many?
What he always talks about is if you need a doctor in Canada, don't call 911, call a taxi, right? So the program would be like Red Seal for the trades, where if you're a carpenter, electrician, you can work across Canada. We're going to do Blue Seal for doctors and nurses. Within 60 days, we're going to give testing. And if they fit our testing requirements and accreditation, we're going to find a pathway into the system. And what that means for this area, number one is for the hospitals. So more staff would reduce wait times, and that's huge. I talked to Stacey Dobbs, and she said it's a game changer. But 2 is a lot of people here, when I knock on doors, 6 or 7 years without a family doctor. So it's getting that going. We have great doctor recruitment programs in Belleville and Quinte West and Prince Edward County. But when they sign the med school students up, it's normally between 6, can be 8 years before they're doctors and they can practice. So it's a quicker fix to getting those doctors into our region to help people now. So that's number one. The second change will be obviously the crime. So changing those crime bills right away to give the police the tools they need to clean our streets up a little bit more. Third is the addiction, obviously getting that funding going so we can help the hub and help people out. Fourth is housing, getting Pinecrest approved right away, making sure that we are looking at the impediments to housing and working with these home builders so they can get housing into the ground, get planning going to get housing up and running. Part of that is immigration, so we're looking at those numbers. 6 would be, my one big thing I was working on before the election was skilled labor and employer surveys, and that was through Loyalist College. Loyalist from the federal government just had a bunch of cuts to students, which really hurts its programming. The problem we had
they're
is
like 70% international students there.
The problem is that we don't have any data, which is crazy to me. We don't know how many skilled trades are open now or in 2 years from now, more importantly, and that's where Loyalist College comes in. Its value proposition is to fill vacant labor gaps and to fill it domestically and then internationally to make sure that's the productivity gap that we talked about before the election and somehow has never come up during the election. Productivity is basically, do we have enough employees to maximize production in our industry? So we want to compete with the Americans and stand up. We need to have maximum capacity in our workforce, in our industries, in our factories, in all of our employers' employment in the region. And so that's Loyalist College to me. And so we'll continue with those surveys to find the gaps and to make sure that Loyalist has the tools to provide the programs to fill the labor gaps in this region. I'm hoping some of that will be skilled trades. We've announced 350,000 apprenticeship positions for skilled trades, and that's going to be as young as 14. Here's a stat that's going to blow you away. Hastings, Prince Edward County. Of graduates from Hastings, Prince Edward School Board, 19% go to university. 37% go to college. 44% of our students either do not graduate or do not go anywhere after high school. 44%. We look at a maximized productivity in a workforce. That means it's round peg, square hole. What are the jobs available, and how do we find pathways for some students to get in? We had a great program from Quinte Economic Development running here called Elevate Plus. Have you heard of that one? So it was taking people in Ontario Works and through a 6-week cohort, sending them to school, paying for them to go to school, and they would graduate into frontline manufacturing positions that are open in this region. And these graduations were emotional. They're powerful because for a lot of times, this is the first job people had. They had their whole family there, and they're graduating to go get a spot in employment. We can do that, and Loyalists should be doing that for everyone in this region. We should be looking to see that 44% that don't graduate or that just finish high school only find a place of employment And Loyalist's job is to find pathways in for them. I'm still on day 16,000 that I've took algebra in high school, which stopped me from getting, by the way, it was a course I did terrible in, stopped me from going to the course I wanted to go to for business, which I think I would have been done well, and I've got another pathway. But everyone doesn't fit into the model. And if we can find ways for trades, or, we need right now 200 police officers in the next few years. We need personal support workers who need to be making more wages by creating more positions and giving value to them. We need advanced manufacturing positions, people that drive forklifts and work in these factories, whether that be Amazon or others. And we need them making good wages, because those that make minimum wage, that's also not going to be affordable. We want people in this region making good wages, and how they do that is to get the training they need through school to get into those positions. And we want our factories and our employers having maximum employment where they're producing the things they need. And if we're doing a good job in trade for Canada, that means we're finding customers. So our companies who are competitive with lower taxes and maximum productivity can keep our employees working. That's success here. It's success in Canada. We replicated it across the board. In 4 years, what I'm hoping for is we've hit all of those with a good stride, so that when we go to the next election, we say this is working. Canadians see that, and we go through the next election saying this was the alternative to what we had for the last 10 years.
Well, thanks, Ryan, for coming on. This has been wonderful. I want to kind of just switch over to a few more soft questions about politics, more about kind of the life in politics, because it's outside of policy, outside of the party stuff. Going from a city councillor to the big show in the federal government, what's that been like for your life personally? Like your halftime in Ottawa, your halftime here. What does that look like on the kind of the practical side? Are you enjoying it? Has it been good?
I enjoyed immensely. I think it was crazy, because I think I was born for this. I really do enjoy it. You go from hospitality, where it's very similar to politics, where I'm here to look after people, and
you're dealing with complaints a lot. That's hospitality, right?
And I think part of that is problem solving. Part of that is you're serving your community. I think that's been the cornerstone of my involvement in politics, but also as a community member before politics. I really get a lot out of serving this community. I love this community, and I was taught early on to give back. And so a lot of it is, there's an element of sacrifice for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I leave my family. I have a 12, a 10, and a 7-year-old. It's 180 nights a year you're in Ottawa. I'll leave either Sunday night, come back late Thursday. Most time I'm in the office.
Will they go with you at all?
No, they're here at school.
You're always by yourself.
So I'm out by myself. It's a very solitary job as well. You spend a lot of time up and back. You're in Parliament on your own. You write your own speeches. But so part of that is really reading over emails, talking to people on the phone, talking to the mayors quite routinely, the MPP. It's a lot to the job. I do really enjoy it. I enjoy the problem solving. I enjoy looking at all angles of how do we make this country better, and how do we serve our residents better. I've really loved that part of it. The family, they do love it as well, that they're involved. I mean, they're door knocking with me. Allison, my wife, is such an incredible rock to me, but she's also there with me. This election has a lot of anxiety to it because of what the consequence for the nation is. But she's been there the whole time, and she feels that anxiety. We feel that in this election. So there's a sacrifice there. I mean, there's times when you're going through this, and it's really hard.
Well, how do you deal with that, though? Because like you say, there's a lot of anxiety, but also with the narrative, there's a lot of this hate that comes at you, and because maybe
a lot of daggers.
People are really
you have to
ready
be centered.
Stab you.
You learn. It's like I always said, it's like a lobster. Who is with stress, lobsters will shed their shell and they'll have a harder shell underneath. I've done that a million times.
Yeah.
I went through a really tough time.
You've been reading
council.
Jordan Peterson, haven't you?
Yeah. I went through a tough time in council. That was a tumultuous time. There was integrity commissioner stuff, and that was really, I think, good training for this job. To stand on my laurels, to know what that means to stand up alone a lot of times and stand up for my integrity. It's the same when you get to this position. A lot of times you're with the party, and the party all comes together as a team. In an election, you're back on your own again. And that becomes, there's a lot of, personal things slung at you. Even my favorite part of the debates, the last debate I was talking about how, every one of the candidates would be a good representative and will always fight hard for the region. Mm-hmm. It became why they're running and what the policy was that was completely different. And even during the debates, I get mud thrown at you. I say, look, that's not very parliamentary, but people talk about coming together, and then they're saying, well, I was born with a silver spoon, and not this guy, is generational wealth, or, personal slang, which I don't like. I don't like that at all. I like going to the issues. So it is tough because the family, I mean, my whole family, my 7-year-old was at the Belleville debate and people are booing hard. And she says, why are they doing that, Daddy? It's tough, right?
Hard.
But it's part of the job. You know, democracy is people have the right to their opinions. Yeah. And, you know, I think that's part of what we go through. And yes, we've had doors slammed in your face, and I've been invited into many living rooms, and you have personal conversations, and there's others where people are hugging you and crying. One I haven't talked about, which was really personal to me, was my father was deeply involved in Quinte West. So there's affiliation I have there with the base. My father went from mayor, and he went through a time where we had the colonel that did heinous things and is in medium security prison right now. That's something that I can't understand this. And this
you're referencing the murder of
but this guy's in medium security, able to go get yard time. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But going back to the base, that those men and women that serve our country, and the air base, which is the largest air base in all of Canada. My father was honorary colonel after he was the mayor because he had such a good relationship. And when he passed, they gave him a military funeral at the National Air Force Museum. But I've continued that relationship with the colonels since. So I do a get-together every year with a lot of them who are now retired, but we're still generals or we're colonels and moved up the ranks. And how, you know, when we look at the 50 homes that were promised by Justin Trudeau in 2015 and not one of them has been built, we talk about affordability, those servicemen and women, one member who was sleeping in his trailer by the water all winter long. But more importantly, what we came up with was a program for veterans where we have some service members who have been hurt and veterans who have been waited 3-4 years now to get any response to the government. We came up with a program that says it's a maximum of 16 weeks or where they get automatic approval. And for members of PTSD, which are so many of them are going to get service dogs. When I walk around to with those veterans and talk to those leadership, you get people who are just sobbing and crying, and that's our military. And so personally, with my father, his legacy that I'm carrying on was that relationship with the military and our servicemen and women that he had such an affinity for, and they loved him. That's also something I bring into this election, that, you know, it's his legacy left with Quinte West, and people talk about how great a mayor he was. And I'll tell you, walk around Trenton, they still remember him, and, you know, it's there. I'm also continuing that, but the biggest legacy left, besides, you know, working really well and being a really good mayor for that city, was that affiliation with that base and how important it is not only for Quinte West to the whole region. So I also walk to there, and that's part of what also drives me as well, is being able to continue that, not as a mayor, because I never wanted to be the mayor. I wanted to be the representative in Ottawa because these are the bigger issues on our economy, on the military, on affordability as a whole. That's what that's the fire in my belly that drives me, is to go into deep, complex issues, which you unfortunately can't do even if you're the chair of the Belleville Economic Development Committee. You have to be in Ottawa in the committees. We're reaching across the aisle, doing massive speeches in Parliament, but also, to me, which I've been very fortunate about, is being able to sit down with Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the opposition, and hopefully the next prime minister, and actually talk to him about what I feel the best way forward is. And a lot of that thinking, especially around cell phones and banking and our airlines, is actually going to be in our policy for the next government. And that's what I'm doing as your member of Parliament for the Bay of Quinte.
So does that purpose and drive counteract the negative that you experience? I guess what I'm really asking is, like, how is your mental health affected? Like, are you seeing a counselor regularly? How do you deal with, like, because you're hearing a lot of this?
No,
crap.
I do. Yeah.
Like, especially if you're have a good relationship with military, with the police force. They're dealing with trauma on a daily basis, and you're just being fed that constantly. How do you deal that on the mental side? Is like I say, is it that drive and just the opportunity of purpose to do something about it that kind of eliminates that negativity, or are you exercising? What are you doing?
Yeah, you have to do it all. It's the hardest job I've ever had. It's all encompassing. It's never ending. You're responsible for so many people, and, you know, when you're an MP, it's 95,000 voters. It's 120 some thousand people in this riding, and when you speak on behalf of Canadians, it's 41.5 million people. You know, it's taxing on you. So no, from that you have to balance. So I do try to work out, you know, when the elections and it's tougher, I've lost already 7 pounds because you're walking 20K a day.
Right. Yeah.
Which is good. It's amazing to me. I said, the best workout program after 5 weeks, if you walk 20 kilometers a day for 7 or 8 hours a day, you'll actually lose 5 or 6 pounds. Combined it with some anxiety, and it's fantastic. But I feel
a little
good.
bit of stress losing.
No, but in Ottawa, you can eat a lot. You're stuck. There's all these. You have to balance it. You have to go to the gym. You have some time for yourself. You go back with your family. There's family, there's region in Ottawa, and you have to balance all three of those. No, but I see someone once in a while because you have to. I try to get to the gym. I'm in the Confederation building. My office has been there, and it has a gym on the 8th floor. So there's a lot of times, 2 or 3 times a week, I have to get up and try to use it. No, it has to be a balance. And I think my point has been I would stop running to be a politician the day they don't have the fire in my belly, the day that I feel someone else is a better representative for me. Until that day, no, I'm compelled to continue to work hard for the residents here, compelled to use my voice to speak on behalf of the residents, but also speak for the issues I think are important and how we're going to fix them. I'm compelled to work, on behalf of Canadians and wear this Canadian pin every day, which I do, because this is what we're doing it for. So, it is tough, but at the end of the day, I'm up for it. I'm also 46. Pierre's actually, which is interesting, he's 3 months younger than me. So Pierre Poliev is also a young leader. We're fighting for the future of this region. It's our kids, but it's going to be our kids who inherit this country and this region. And that's what we ultimately fight for at the end of the day.
On the personal side, how do you, with 180 days in Ottawa, you're away from your wife.
Yeah.
How do you maintain a good marriage? Has this affected your marriage in negative, positive way? How do you navigate through that?
Knock on wood, it hasn't. It's been really good.
I mean, marriage is tough on a good day, right?
Marriage is tough as a good day, and then you throw in being away. And I give a lot of credit to my wife, and I love the fact that she believes in me and she buys into this. I think everyone always says also it's just the MP. And you look at that with Pierre and his wife, Anita, and he's got a child with special needs. She's a nonverbal, his older daughter. It's taxing on the family and on the kids. And, they know that, I could not compare to military members who go overseas for 6-8 months. No way. Right. Like all respect for them. So I'm away 180 days, and I'm one of the luckier ones that I'm 2.5-3 hour drive from Ottawa. Some of these members who get on a plane and 5 hour drive, then 5 hour flight, then 3 hour drive. But no, it is tough. So we're always, we have a strong marriage. I'm so very fortunate that she buys into it with me. I say she's probably even more conservative than I am. She's really on board. She's got supports as well. We've got really good close friends that are good support. We've got one friend, Michelle. She was our doula through our births, and I call her the campaign doula. She's also with us. You have to have all of us have to have mental health checks. You check yourself because it's a lot. You get the worst things hurled at you. People will post things all the time. You have to have that thick shell to get through that. At the same time, never stop, speaking your truth. I think for me, my greatest strength is always to not be afraid. One of the biggest criticisms that came from my opponent at the beginning, and he said at the beginning, he hasn't said it since, so maybe he had it talked out of him, but that I was not here for the region. I'm here. That's the only thing I'm here for, is to speak my truth on behalf of the region, because that's what drives me. That's what drives through my belly. That's what I've done since I was a community leader 15, 20 years ago from now being the MP. That's the thing that does drive me, that no matter what, no matter what you're doing in Ottawa, the best part of being a member of parliament is when you stand up, when they say the member from Bay of Quinte, you're speaking your truth. You're the one up speaking your words. And what I've learned to do better since I've got in, I think the first part of being an MP is drinking from the fire hose, because you're trying to learn parliamentary procedure, which is the hardest thing. And it took me about 2 years to finally learn, how do we get bills on the floor? How does Parliament work? How does it function? Because the committees are the same as Robert Rules.
I remember you posted a photo of the book when you first got elected.
Yes, the first book, procedures, the green book they call it, right? And you learn that. But the best thing about that member of Parliament is when you stand up, and I've learned now when I get up and I can just put 5 notes on a piece of paper, I can speak from my heart, from that fire in my belly on behalf of the residents on any topic. And that was the best part of being that representative up in Ottawa. And, I told the story about this in a video I've done. I've only done one video this campaign because it's been so much, but it was the one video because I filmed it. And I talked about what I love most about Pierre Poilievre is that a speech he gave in the House of Commons is why the House of Commons is green. Mm-hmm. And he talks about it. It's because when the Magna Carta was signed, it was in the fields of Runningmead where power from royalty was given to the commoners. So Pierre, way back when he wore glasses every day in Parliament, talked about this is the House of the Commons, the House of the common people, and we are here for those common people, and that's why we stand. It's green to remind us that this is the House of the people, and that when you're a minister or even prime minister, it's a deviation of the word servant, and you are a servant to the people. And what we found, or what we felt, and I felt very clearly in the last 10 years, is that government felt that they were the masters and the people were the servants, where it should be what we believe and what Pierre believes fully in that House of Commons is that people are the masters and we're the servants, and that we will serve the people in the House of Commons every single day. That's what I've loved about being in there on this side, and that's why I know I'm in the right side being a conservative, and I know if we're able to form government, it's going to be great for the people because we're actually taking power away from the government and giving it to the people. Mm.
For those people who may want to get involved in politics but are really unsure about even how to start or how to contribute, what advice would you give them? Where do they start?
Run for municipal government. Run as a city councillor. It is the best thing you can do. You're the closest to the people. The buck stops with you, whether that's a pothole or a sidewalk or an issue with the library, or you could get any issue, but it stops with you. You don't have staff. You operate on your own. You learn the best part about even the basics of democracy is it's all about doors. Like still to this day, if you don't like door knocking, don't run to be a politician. Go and volunteer with a politician. If you don't want to even be a councillor, if you like someone who's running for council, and I know that there's a municipal council next fall, volunteer when you find a name you like and go door knocking with them. They come up with the literature. You have to sell yourself on your ideas and you have to get elected. It's the purest form of democracy. And when I served as a Belleville City Councillor, I felt it was really rewarding. The difference was I didn't feel like the change you could make was substantial because it's always, you only have 2% of the city budget to work with. Everything else is predetermined. You're really fighting hard. And I'll say this, I think it's going to be a big, municipal election. I think every election is becoming more important as people understand what could be lost maybe in the last 10 years as they saw if government had more control. So I think even with municipal, whether it be just the issues as a whole, the speed cameras have come up even in my election.
Yeah, $1 million in 5 months, City of Belleville. Thank you very much.
They've even put it in there. And I was Brooker and I early on when my opponent was making shots at me. I said, I alluded the carbon tax is very much like the speed cameras, right? It's an added tax, and already when Belleville's paying the highest fees for property taxes. That was
when life's already unaffordable. Yes, let's throw in some more charges.
It's now come up. It's $2.5 million they're pulling out of residents, which is $50 per man, woman, and child in the city. And I know everyone I know has gotten that. And my point was, there's different ways you can calm that, but it's going to be a municipal issue for sure.
Right.
But this is what you get when you run for municipal politics. So if you want to be involved in municipal or politics as a whole, anyone running for MPP, MP, or councillor, first, reach out to volunteer. And you don't have to door knock. Sometimes you just do phone calls or you just sit in an office and you work with them. You're involved with the campaign. To, run for city councillor, because I think it's the best job you can get to be close to the people. And if you really like that job, then there's other stepping stones there. But at the end of the day, do it because you want to serve the people. And I think there's no greater reward in my mind in this planet than giving back to the people. And I gave awards out every year called Community Champion Awards, and they were coins. I got that from the military, and they're all serialized, and I only gave 150 a year, but I asked people in this region to nominate people who are helping others, who gave service to others. And I'll tell you, it's very rare that we say people only have, it's not an infinite amount of time. It's a finite amount of time that we have. And you hear that every day from, when you read the obituaries, and we had the deputy fire chief this week passed away, Jim Young, and how people, your life is so short, but those people that give back to their community, service to self, to me, are the most valuable in our community, because they're actually giving the finite amount of time they have back to the community. And we need so many of them, whether that be food banks, whether that be community organizations, the library, but also with serving your community as a politician, as a service member, it's not all roses. You're not being, I think we broke down the amount of hours when you're a city councillor, it's less than minimum wage when you put all the hours in, but it's so rewarding to me. And I say anyone who wants to get involved, please do it because of that reason, because you want to serve your community. And I think if you do it for that reason, we're going to be, and we have more politicians like that, this country is going to be fantastic. It'll be in good shape.
And speaking of getting involved, make sure you get out and vote, everybody.
Yes.
If you're not registered, elections.ca to get registered.
Well, we just say, what I say is easier. Just if you have a driver's license or a health card, show up on voting day. That's all you need. Don't worry about, I think it's some people get dissuaded by the rules. You have a license, you can vote. As long as you're living in this region on your license, show up to the voting booth. I say to people, this is going to be the most consequential, but probably the most attended election in Canadian history, meaning get ready for lines. Know it's going to be a wait, but it's worth it. It's worth it for this election to show up and have your vote. We're hoping there's over 76% of Canadians that are out, because I think it's really good for democracy. And no matter the result, we're always going to be fighting hard for a better Canada, making sure that we, and I will always, no matter what, fight for this region. Work hard on behalf of Canadians, and I'm just happy to have been serving and to serve and to be here with you today. Thanks for doing this podcast. Yeah. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks again for coming on, Ryan. Maybe you can plug the people where to find you, how to get in touch with you, and check out the Conservative platform.
Yeah, votewilliams.ca.
Perfect.
That's it.
All right, April 28th, everybody. Make sure you get out and vote. Don't be apathetic. Let's get out there. All right, that's it.
That's right. Thank you.